forget how busy April can be, right? First round of the NFL draft, first round of the NBA playoffs. It's Spectator Sports. I'm your host, Sebastian Fonseca, with a special crossover episode. This is episode number 98. Before we get into dissecting the NFL draft and the action across the NBA, please do us a massive favor. Like this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Take a look at our Instagram and TikTok pages for clips from this podcast. You can also get the full audio from this podcast on Spotify. All links are in the description. Starting off with the top overall pick, Caleb Williams is officially a Chicago Bear. And we heard about all these domino effects starting off from last year when the Carolina Panthers came knocking on Ryan Poles' door saying, hey, we want to move up. Can we make this trade? And Ryan was thinking, I don't know what I have with Justin Fields just yet. I'm sure I'll take what you want. And they got a treasure trove of picks that included the first round pick this year, a second round pick last year, and they do still have a second round pick next year in 2025. It is quite a haul for what ended up being Bryce Young over to Carolina, and what Chicago ended up getting is Caleb Williams. They got DJ Moore as part of the package, and so many other little things that they've been able to do. Caleb Williams is now walking into one hell of a scenario. He has DeAndre Swift in the backfield. He has Cole Kmet from the tight end spot. Already established DJ Moore, already been there in Chicago. Keenan Allen, the veteran. And then Ryan Poles does another move at pick number 9. He goes with Rome Odunze from Washington, and that's a third weapon. Offensively, I think Chicago is pretty much set. Young talent mixed in with some veteran mentorship, and definitely need to see what happens with the play calling situation, but Chicago definitely has something defensively, have been trending in the right direction. Still not a fantastic unit, but still fairly solid. And it feels that only if these scenarios were flipped, if you could imagine if these scenarios were flipped, if Carolina just stood pat, figured out a way to hold on to the pick, and then maybe something happens where they end up getting the top overall pick, what would have happened? The landscape in the NFL would have been much different. But what it is today, Chicago has their guy for many years to come. It does feel that all 4 members of the NFC North are very much in contention of making the playoffs this season. We had 6 total quarterbacks go in the top 10, 3 in a row for the first 3 picks, with Jaden Daniels going to Washington and then Drake May going to New England, number 3. And then at number 8, strange move with Atlanta. They already had Kirk Cousins signed in free agency, but then they'd elect to draft Michael Penix Jr. at number 8 overall. He had a pretty good couple of years over in Washington, led them to the national championship game. Yeah, I think he's a project, but I don't think he was worth it at the 8th overall pick. I mean, some people were even saying he's a second round selection. But Penix to Atlanta, very strange pick. The GM and owner Arthur Blank had a interesting discussion. You could see that on camera. It certainly rubbed Arthur Blank the wrong way, because you think at anything at number 8, if you need anything, it's on the defensive side. Defensive line, they could use some edge rushers. It is a draft not full of too many D-line talent or edge rusher talent to begin with, but there still are some pieces. You have Dallas Turner out of Alabama. You have Latu out of UCLA. Those 2 guys are pretty solid pass rushers, and I thought maybe those were viable picks, or if anything, you trade down and you still end up getting them, and a treasure trove of picks that you can use in later rounds. But instead, they stand pat and they go with Michael Penix Jr. And this whole situation is very, very strange. What we're hearing is that this is like the Aaron Rodgers treatment back in 2020, when you have Aaron Rodgers, who has the MVP. He goes out and wins another one in spite of the GM drafting Jordan Love in the 2020 draft. Now, is Kirk Cousins going to do that? I don't know. But he is coming off an Achilles injury, and it's all things go to plan. He should be ready come the start of the 2024 season. But the question is, how long can he stay healthy for? And the contract kind of works out that after 2 years, his cap hit wouldn't be too bad if he were to be cut or traded. Certainly an option there if maybe you have Penix sit and wait, just like Jordan Love did after a couple of years, and then he takes over the reins. I do like easing rookie quarterbacks into the situation, but right now, if you're making this move, a big contract with Kirk Cousins, I feel like you should just go all in, and especially a first-round draft pick with the mentality making such an aggressive swing in free agency, you should continue that trend and fix all loose ends of your football team. Weird situation in Atlanta. We'll monitor the situation and see how it unfolds. Certainly going to be a lot of pressure on Michael Penix Jr. to meet these first-round expectations maybe in a couple of years when he takes over the reins from Kirk Cousins. Minnesota was wheeling and dealing after Kirk Cousins left. They made a couple of moves, and we thought this is what they're trying to do to get back into the quarterback conversation, because they needed somebody, because after signing Sam Darnold, you don't want to just go into 2024 with that being your only option at quarterback for your starter position. And they ended up getting JJ McCarthy after making an additional trade with the New York Jets to get up to the 10th overall selection. And with that, they got JJ McCarthy, and I think JJ is going into a great spot in Minnesota. He has Justin Jefferson, one of the best receivers in the NFL, TJ Hawkinson, a top 3 tight end candidate, and you have Jordan Addison, who's coming off a pretty decent rookie year, certainly would be a great wide receiver number 2, and Kevin O'Connell, I think he's one of the best young minds in terms of offensive mentalities in the NFL, so that's a match made in heaven. He's walking into a great situation, and now that's another NFC North team that has a rookie quarterback, and to go in with the Lions and Packers, who have established quarterbacks now. It's going to be a very competitive division coming up. But to dissect the other moves that Minnesota did, after having their 23rd pick, they thought maybe they'll stay back, they'll trade back, or maybe even move up. They decided to move up to 17, and there were some pretty good cornerback options out there, but they passed on that, and they elected to go with edge rusher. And with the amount of draft capital they gave up, it was a 3rd round pick that they gave up as well in the process. It just felt like an overreach for number 17. I don't know what the mentality was going into that decision, because that leaves them only with 3 selections for next year's draft in 2025. And we'll see how the other dominoes work, because it may not be the final product. We are only in day 1 of a 3-day draft process, so Minnesota still has plenty of moves on the board to facilitate the next couple of drafts, but certainly I didn't really like that move for that 2nd overall pick. And as the Eagles selected Quinion Mitchell from Toledo, this meant that Terrion Arnold was the next viable cornerback candidate, and we saw that Detroit decided to make a deal with the Dallas Cowboys to move up a few spots in the 1st round to get a cornerback. And they've been consistently building to the draft. Since 2021, they had Penei Sewell, they had Jahmyr Gibbs recently, Aiden Hutchinson, and all of these guys have been Pro Bowl caliber type of players. Terrion Arnold was one of the best cornerback prospects coming out of this draft. He's from Alabama and certainly brings some consistency to that secondary. After losing CJ Gardner-Johnson, they still have Brian Branch in the safety spot. They brought in Carlton Davis from Tampa Bay, and it's certainly a revamped secondary, but certainly is an improved secondary, I think, with the selection of Terrion Arnold. For Dallas, I thought it's been a very quiet offseason, but certainly need to address the offensive line position, and they still selected Tyler Guyton out of Oklahoma, a solid selection. I thought that there were potentially other options out there on the table if they wanted to move up, but Jerry Jones, after saying he went all in, he's been very quiet on that sentiment since. He's been making some quieter moves, but he still has to work on getting the extensions of CeeDee Lamb and Micah Parsons, and that is the problem when you have such great drafts. You eventually have to pay them, and recently with AJ Brown seeking the mega extension that he got. He is now the highest paid receiver, and he's locked up until 2029. So the Eagles are doing their thing with making the extensions. They build strength for strength with receiver, and Dallas is still kind of pandering around, looking at the landscape, and very much behind this type of extension deadlines for their star players. The Chiefs have been going through this revolving door of wide receiving talent ever since Tyreek Hill was traded away to Miami, and with the recent events with Rashee Rice and his off the field issues, it leaves another potential hole in their receiving corps. So they decided to trade up, and they got Xavier Worthy out of Texas, the speedster that set a new combine record. Certainly we don't know what that's going to translate into the NFL, but certainly after getting Deshaun Jackson and Tyreek Hill, Andy Reid's been great with guys in space and getting those faster receivers. So we'll see how that translates with Patrick Mahomes and this Kansas City Chief offense, but certainly is another toy and a tool with this impending trial that could be happening with Rashee Rice and that legal situation over in Kansas City. And in that move, they traded with, surprisingly, their AFC rivals, the Buffalo Bills. And we thought maybe Buffalo would want a receiver, but this is a fairly deep receiver draft, so I'm not surprised by them trading down at least once. But then they decided to trade down again with the Carolina Panthers, and with that, they selected Xavier Legette out of South Carolina, and certainly Bryce Young needs some outside help. Adam Thielen is an aging receiver, clearly not enough, and this certainly is a move in the right direction, and it also brings them the ability to use a fifth-year option if needed, depending on how Legette's career turns out. Buffalo is making some weird moves. I think these are one thing to take a step back, get some picks, but now I don't know what exactly the compensation one for both of these moves back into the second round, but certainly they need to start making some moves, because after Stephon Diggs was traded away, you need to retool the receiving room, because there's simply no one for Josh Allen to throw to in this upcoming season. Let's talk about the Sixers and the Knicks. As the series shifts over to Philadelphia, we learned that Joel Embiid has been dealing with a slight neurological disorder that's known as Bell's palsy, and that has to do with one of the cranial nerves, and you can see sometimes that he's been recently wearing a lot of sunglasses, keeping his eyes away from the cameras, and recently some people have been able to dissect that he's having some issues closing one of his eyes. It came out later on Thursday that he's been dealing with this Bell's palsy, and it is a nerve issue possibly that could have some long-term effects, but can be temporary, or if not reversed, just due to treatment, and let's certainly hope that that is the case. But he had a magnificent performance nonetheless, with a 50-point performance against the New York Knicks, and helped them get on the board to cut this deficit down to 2-1 heading into Game 4, the pivotal Game 4. Tyrese Maxey was phenomenal himself. He had 25 points. And also you got a nice boost from Kelly Oubre as well, because on the other side, the Knicks were firing on all cylinders as well. They had finally had a good performance from Jalen Brunson, who had 39 points. They were keeping pace for much of it, but just seems that Joel Embiid was just too strong, too into it. Extra day of rest also with the travel time helps out a lot, but now still pressure is very much on the 76ers in Game 4, because this is a do or die game. If you go down 3-1, it's probably over in 5 as the series heads back up to MSG, but if it's 2-2, it's anyone's guess who comes out of this series between the Knicks and Sixers. Going back to Wednesday, the 1-8 matchup between the Celtics and Heat, we thought after Jimmy Butler was injured and potentially going to miss this series that this was going to be an easy cupcake series for the Boston Celtics. Well, hold your horses right there, because after a Herculean performance from not just Tyler Hero but the entire Heat team, they piled in 23 three-pointers in an amazing fashion, and this was able to split the first two games and tie it at 1 game apiece heading into Game 3 as this series shifts over to Miami. With Jimmy Butler not there, that is basically their engine, and it felt like there was no chance for Miami to even have a game. I thought game 2 would have been a complete blowout, but a gritty team led by Coach Spo, is always going to give it its all, and they did so. And I can't even blame Jason Tatum or Jaylen Brown. They had pretty solid performances too, but I think someone who can blame is Kristaps Porzingis. Kristaps Porzingis was matched up with Caleb Martin throughout the game, and I thought that was a big sign of disrespect that Coach Spo tried to implement, because we know that Porzingis is more of a perimeter player. He doesn't like to bang on the block, and you could see that with that type of finesse player, you could use a smaller player to try and deter him, because he struggled. I mean, the size mismatch between him and Caleb Martin is appalling. Him at a 7'3", he should be on the low post, getting inside. Instead of settling for jump shots, he should be dunking, layups, hook shots in the paint. But that wasn't the case in game 2. He was stuck for 1 for 9, 2-minute jump shots. I needed to get him into the paint, because that's the last guy that I think is really the missing link for the Celtics being a true contender. They're probably the most untrustworthy 64-win team I've ever seen, because they were dominant in the regular season, but that was also with the East being historically bad. I mean, they won this conference with 14 games to spare. The disparity between them and the 2 seed is like the Grand Canyon, perhaps. And I think the West has far better competition. And despite the inexperience of OKC or even Minnesota, I think they would give a much better run than whoever the Celtics face if they were to make it to the Eastern Conference Finals. It certainly is interesting to see how this unfolds, because this is again coming back to Joe Mazzulla, because in year 1 with Ime Udoka, they went all the way to the finals, and after resetting due to those off-the-court issues, Joe Mazzulla is always going to be compared to Ime Udoka. And last year, they almost came back to make it to the finals after trailing 3-0, but it made sense that to bring him back, because they did respond after making some adjustments. But again, in this matchup between Spo and Mazzulla, Spo is one of the best NBA minds out there. Despite him not even winning a Coach of the Year award, he's still a very strong, very smart coaching mind under the tutelage of Pat Riley, and he's always been coaching circles around these younger head coaches. So it's a big shoes to fill, big coaching mismatch perhaps, but certainly has the better talent, has the better roster, and the luxuries of a playoff series is that it's the best of 4. So you can have a poor showing, which I'm sure the Celtics are going to have throughout this postseason run, but they should be able to handle this. They need to come out guns blazing in game 3, really show Miami who's boss in this series, and return to their dominant form, because otherwise if they play around with Miami and give them any sign of hope, who knows, Jimmy Butler may be able to come through that door and then provide a further scare and ruin Boston's championship hopes. The Lakers started off hot again, but just like the first 2 games, they faded out, and the Nuggets just have the Lakers number, but they've lost now 11 straight games to this Denver Nuggets team. Jokic isn't even playing at his best. He was kind of stuck with foul trouble, and again, Jamal Murray didn't have the most efficient night. It was Aaron Gordon. Aaron Gordon was getting great looks from Jokic from their high post play, reverse dunk, layups, whatever it was, putbacks. He was there. 29 and 15. He's been that X factor. When Jamal and Jokic are maybe a little bit quiet, you know that Aaron Gordon's going to step up. And then once Aaron Gordon kind of quieted down, Michael Porter Jr. stepped up to the plate. He knocked in a couple of threes. After trailing by double digits in the first half, they almost cut that thing in half. Third quarter, they went off on a big run and outscored the Lakers by 14 points, and you could see that also defensively they made some adjustments. They've started off matching up head-to-head with Jokic and AD, and it's kind of worked. I mean, it's not just solely Jokic, because he's not the best defender. He's been getting plenty of help, but every time now we're seeing that AD wants to get into the paint, there are 3 blue jerseys around him, and they're swarming him. They're forcing him to get rid of the ball. I saw a couple turnovers thanks to great help defense by KCP. And that's a big problem, and that mainly stems with the Lakers struggling to hit perimeter shots. It's been up and down for D'Angelo Russell since joining the Lakers, and these last couple postseason runs, and especially against the Denver Nuggets, for the most part, D'Angelo Russell has struggled. And in this matchup, D'Angelo Russell was nowhere to be seen. 0 for 6 from deep, 0 for 7 total for a nothing burger. 0. And that's completely disappointing. He wanted the smoke, turned up very soft, and I thought it was extremely poor showing from him after having such a great response after the All-Star break. He just hasn't been able to be consistent enough for the Lakers to really trust him. And when you don't have to pay attention to D'Angelo Russell, and even Austin Reeves hasn't been great, so they've been able to collapse bodies into the paint, and that's allowed for spacing problems for Anthony Davis. He has struggled to create space. That's led to their disarray or just their dysfunction in the fourth quarter. Last time in game 2, he only attempted 1 shot, had 0 points, and for much of the fourth quarter, he was virtually shut down. LeBron clearly is aging. He couldn't really bring a lot after that first quarter burst. And without a lot of bench play that we haven't been seeing for much of this series, it's very clear that the Lakers are very much outmatched. And I don't know if it's going to happen in game 4. Maybe they stave off elimination, but I don't have a lot of faith in that. I think it's going to be a very easy sweep on Saturday, and we'll see what happens, but it definitely doesn't look good for the Los Angeles Lakers. So that's it for this special edition of Spectator Sports. Remember that I'm your host, Sebastian Fonseca. We have clips from this episode and other episodes on TikTok and Instagram, also here on YouTube. You can find the audio from this podcast on Spotify. All links are in the description. Thank you so much for Joey for editing this podcast, and I'll catch you on the next one. Until next time, take care.